I'm Rob Koehler. I'm the Director of Education and Program Development at WADA. Normally when we talk about education in WADA, we get up in front and talk to people about what we're doing, what we have, our tools, our resources. But we thought today may be a better time just to bring back some of the discussion you were talking about what deters athletes from doping. We looked at the code today and I make an observation from the code. The majority is focused around testing and investigations. There's very little in there about true education, but there is mandatory information. And we make the distinction between the two. Information is a here and now, so giving the information to someone, a brochure about the rules. And education is about changing values, working with values over long term. If we look at the current programs happening in the field, I think the reality is that the focus has been on testing. Now we've increased a little bit on doing investigations. We did a survey and a lot of anti-doping organizations think their education program is education, but in fact it's information. And very few are doing substantive education programs. And the question I raise, is this an effective approach? Maybe at one time it was, but is it effective now as we move forward? I often ask the question, what is doping? When I ask that question, different things come through different people's minds. But if you really bring it back down, doping is simple. Doping is cheating. It's cheating, and that's what it is. Yes, people can say it's taking certain drugs, doing this, but it's cheating. And I also want to take a look a little bit about other aspects of society and what's happening in the world about cheating. If we look, right now, some would say we're living in a cheating culture. If you look at lawyers, you look at doctors, they're cheating, over-padding their billing. You look at finance people, tax evasions. Cheating has become possibly more acceptable. So we have our adults are cheating. Now we have students. In schools, studies have shown that cheating is widespread. And that cheating now is being justified saying we're smarter than everybody else because we're not getting caught. And it's a good game. You don't get caught, you're smarter. And kids. Kids always experiment with cheating. The difference between adults and kids, when you're on the playground and you're trying to break the rules and you cheat, what happens? Normally one of your friends calls you out. You can't do that. It's not the way you play. But as we get older, we stop doing that. We look at sport itself and cheating. Sport is, you're supposed to be playing with inside the rules. But being a sportsman, we always know we always try to stretch those rules. And some potential examples, if you look at hockey in the NHL, that you had owners themselves trying to manipulating the salary caps to be able to get more expensive athletes over a long period of time. So the owners were setting examples. Fencing. You potentially could have fencing athletes who pretend their shoelaces untied to take a breather, to take a break. You're not allowed to do that in the sport. We looked at badminton and badminton players at the Olympic Games. They were throwing matches to get a better draw, another form of cheating. And some would say that new equipment, new technology, it's stretching the limits and it may be creating that whole idea of how far can we stretch it within the limits. So it may foster a culture of cheating, potentially. These are questions. But I think in general, by our nature in sport, we're always trying to push that limit. It happens in business, it happens in sport, but we're always trying to push it. What else is happening? Sport and society. Well, we know what's happening everywhere. Right now we're having problems with bribery. We're having problems with match fixing, trafficking, and corruption, both in sport and society. The question I raise is this anything new? Has it always been going on? Or is it just more exposed because of the mass communication and the open of media to the public and through social media and getting messages out quickly? I want to take a little bit look a little bit about society. If we take a look at society, right now, currently in North America, you have 1% of the population that's rich. You have a middle class that's shrinking and a lower class that's increasing. Let's take a look at sport. In sport, you have a very similar population. You have a very small part of the population that's making millions. You have very few, or you have less that are making a very comfortable living, and you have a lot of athletes just barely getting by. So there's a mirror image of each other with sport and society. What's happening in society may be happening in sport, and vice versa. And what people say right now is we're looking at a me generation. What is that me generation? Well, it's about me, where I'm taught I need to go to school, I need to have big goals, and it doesn't matter how I get there. I can cheat, I can get there, it doesn't matter, I just need to get there, because it's all about me. And that's a generation people say that we're into now, where it's self-serving, all about me, and not about the community. And I asked that question about sport. Is sport what it used to be? Have things changed in sport that are resulting in where we are today? We all know that what some athletes made in their entire career, some athletes are making now in 1 year. 15, 20 years of a career, that's long obviously, are making 1 year. So the risks and the benefits are much higher now. 1 year of cheating, you could get what you could have had your whole career. And we also have to remember sport wasn't a multi-billion-dollar industry what it is today. So the landscape has changed, totally changed. Now we looked at a report to determine what was going on, what were athletes thinking. And the report came back and said there was a big moral disengagement and what athletes were coming and saying what their perception was. Not all athletes, obviously this is a study that's fairly limited. Athletes are justifying. Some of the athletes that were saying we're justifying the use. Moral disengagement, moving away from our responsibility by doing euphemistic labeling where it wasn't steroids, but they used to refer to it as juice, tack, tick. So they get away from that stigma of using a steroid and reducing what it actually is. They use advantageous comparisons. As an example, I'm not drinking, I'm not smoking, I'm not drinking and driving. It's not that bad what I'm doing. People are doing a lot worse than I am. I'm just taking prohibited substances. I could be doing a lot worse. There's a displacement of responsibility, and we've seen this in the media recently, that everybody else is doing it, so I have to, and why shouldn't I? There's a diffusion of responsibility. When athletes are looking and saying, if everyone's doing it, it must be right, there's a distortion of the consequences. Where some of the athletes were saying, it's not that bad, it's not that harmful to me, and the consequences are a little bit overstated. Because look at me, I'm healthy. I'm living a healthy lifestyle. So they distort the consequences. Another question I want to raise to you with regards to moral reasoning. This study was done by Dr. Sharon Stoll. It was done in over 28 countries. And she took grade 6-year-old students and looked at their moral reasoning. She did a study measuring their moral reasoning in grade 6. The results came back, they were pretty equal. They had pretty equal moral reasoning, value, skills that they put in place. Now we take those students when they're in grade 12, 6 years later. What do you think happens? You have a non-athlete population and you have an athlete population. I was very surprised at the results of this. In fact, the athletes that were involved in sport compared to the non-athletes had a lower moral reasoning score. And the study further goes on and says that revenue-producing athletes in team sports have lower moral reasoning. Women athletes have a higher score than men. That individual sports athletes score higher on a moral reasoning than team sport athletes. And the longer you were involved in sport, the longer or the more your moral reasoning skills decreased. We used to think that moral reasoning had to start at a young age, which it does. But Dr. Stoll did work with the Atlanta Braves in the Major League Baseball and actually changed the moral reasoning of that whole clubhouse, working with them over time, adults, and increased their moral reasoning skills. So it's possible to do with young athletes, elite athletes, and older people. The other question I raise is sporting governments. What are the incentives to catch cheats? I heard you talk today about governments getting involved, but what's the incentive? What's the incentive for an international sport federation president to catch a lot of cheats when you as athletes are the #1 marketing device they have? And the last thing you want to see is you go under. Is that correct? It's a question. Government leaders representing countries at the Olympic Games. Do you want to send cheats? Do you want to get caught? Not so sure. So is there an imbalance there? Is it adding to potential problems that we may have? I'll pose a hypothetical question. Let's step back a little bit. And if I said, we don't have a doping problem in sport, what would you do? Would you go out and start a massive testing campaign and start testing everybody and going out and testing? Probably not. My guess is probably not. Would you start investigating people and going in and checking? There's no problem in doping, so you start investigating, finding out what people are doing. Would you do that? Probably not. But if there was no problem right now, would you educate? Would you have deterrence and prevention programs in place to inform people about the risks and why they shouldn't do it and what the values of sport are? You probably would. You would start with testing education campaigns, just education campaigns. And that would be the main focus. Where would your main focus be? You'd be in schools, you'd be with parents, you would be the sporting officials and the youth, because you want to foster that positive attitude towards doping-free sport. The question is, are we doing this now? And my response is no. In fact, we're doing very little education out there. Doing a lot of information, but education, very, very little. So that's why I'd like to look at the old versus the new. And this potentially looks like the old code. But as we move forward with the revision of the code, we see that the more emphasis is put on education, on educating people about the values of sport. Studies will show you that the single most deterrent from an athlete is their moral decision making. It's not testing. It's not going to change someone's way they're going to move. It's actually their moral reasoning and their moral value and their moral choices. That's what it comes down to. And that's why we need to start working more in education and with schools. But how do we do this? It's not easy. And we've already started doing it at WADA, and we're in a process of starting it. And this is a military term of unity of object and unity of effort. And this is what we need to do as we move forward. We need, based on the research that we're doing and we've commissioned from others, is we need to start developing a moral set of values. A moral set of values where we have everybody, every athlete, sign on to those as a moral contract. And not once in their career, but every single year. You sign a contract to play for a team, well, you sign a contract, a moral contract, on what your values are going to be and what you're going to reflect within that sport. And research will show that if you reinforce that every single year, that moral contract, you'll get more buy-in. So we need to start doing this. We need to develop curriculum that's interactive and is value-based. Now, the one big issue we have, teaching values, is not easy. You can develop the curriculum, but you need the right people to send the right messages, because a value-based message has to have the right approach towards it. We need to evaluate, and this is where we've dropped the ball as well. Evaluating programs. We simply go out and do it and think it's going to work. It doesn't work that way. You need to assess what your population's requirements are. You need to actually do the education programs, and then you need to look back and see how it's working. And that's the 3 stages, to see how it's working and the post-tests. And it's always adapting. So we can't just be happy saying, we have a curriculum, we're going into schools, and leave it at that. It needs to adapt with culture, with time, and with different age groups. How do we do it? What's our unity effort? Well, we need to get everybody involved. We need governments to play a larger role in embracing the messages and putting it in schools. There is an issue here, because if you look at the world of anti-doping, is it that big to some governments? We think it's big because we live in it every day. But if you really break it down, and we talked from the beginning, it's about values. And every government across the world should be interested in teaching values and value messages to students, whether it's primary or university. That should be a base of their curriculum. We've developed tools, but recognizing that WADA message is only one message, now we're trying to work with a series of organizations. We're trying to engage the IOC. We're trying to engage UNESCO. We're trying to engage Fair Play International, where we come together with common messages and individual messages, but work together as a team to get in, and not as individuals, everybody doing their own thing. It's time to start working together as a team. We need national anti-doping organizations to put more focus on education. Testing is easy. It's measurable. I can go to my government and say, I've done 5,000 tests this year, we're successful. And I spent X amount of millions of dollars doing it. But how do I go and say, I've spent X amount of $1 million and I've educated 25 people or 25,000 people? Okay, well, what's the results? I can't show you. I need another 10 years to show you. Ooh, 10 years. I'll be out of government in 4 years. Stick with the testing. That's the attitude we need to change, is we need to change the need to educate. We need to work with UNESCO, as I mentioned, in the associated school networks. So important to get into these groups and use the channels that are there. We need the IFs to develop a community-based approach. International federations need to be involved in this. The IOC needs to be involved. They simply just can't say we have to do it because we're told to. It's a compliance issue. They have to believe in it. And that's where athletes need to go to their IFs and put the belief in doing this because it's the right thing, not because we have to. And that's the change in mindset we need, going from the have to want to. And in general, I think we need a global approach. What's global? Well, it's a global program with a local feel. Because what I'm going to do in the United States and the ways I'm going to deliver those messages is not the same way I'm going to do in Papua New Guinea or in Kenya, but the overall arching messages are the same. But that's why we need the involvement of national anti-doping organizations to get in more value-based education. Because in the end, it comes down to choice. And you have that choice. And athletes have that choice. But we need to equip them with the right skills, the right moral reasoning skills, when faced with doping, to reject it. And that's what we're in the process of doing now. And it's not an easy job because buy-in is very difficult. But that's the process that we're starting. Thank you.